Welcome, everybody, to this session about developing cloud-native applications with the Spring tool suite. Happy that you're all here. We'll dive you through some slides, but just a few slides. The majority of the talk will be live demos in the IDE. Otherwise, it will get quite boring, right? Talking about an IDE or doing development inside an IDE with slides, that doesn't really make sense. So be prepared for us struggling a little bit, or if something goes wrong, the usual case, it could happen in those situations. Before we get started, the usual thing, don't trust us, don't believe anything we say. Any predictions about the future could be quite hard. But first, who are we? Kris.
Yeah, so I'm Kris the Volder, and I work on the tools team. And basically that means I work on Spring Tool Suite. In the past, I've also worked on the Groovy and Grails tools, and but nowadays I spend most of my time trying to make better tools for Spring Boot, and I've also worked on the microservices dashboard that Martin is going to talk mostly about. So.
Okay, thank you. My name is Martin Lippert. I also work for Pivotal on the same team as Kris, also working on the Spring tool suite, on Eclipse-based tooling, and looking a little bit beyond what comes next, what additional stuff can we do to make your life easier, basically, right? That's the idea. Before we get started, two important things. If you would like to ask questions, please feel free to do that in between. You do not have to wait until the end. We have a Q&A section at the end, but if there's something important, if you have some important question that comes to your mind, raise your hand, let us know. We are happy to answer questions. If that takes too long, one question, we might say, okay, we continue with that discussion at the end or even after the talk, but feel free to ask questions in between. And the second thing is, who is programming in Java and using Spring? Okay, keep your hands up. Who is using, keep your hands up if you're using Eclipse, Spring tool suite. Okay, cool, great, awesome, thank you. So let's get started about our talk. We will start with a quick intro. We will dive into what's new, showing you some new features that makes life easier. And then we have another section in the end talking about what you might have already seen in the keynotes or in other talks appearing, this new cool boot dashboard. So Kris, want to get started with the Eclipse and Spring tool suite?
Sure. So in case you didn't know what Spring tool suite is, I'm sure probably people know what Eclipse is. So Spring tool suite is basically a customized version of Eclipse with some extra things added in that make life easier for working with Spring applications. So you have a model of the Spring Beans that you can browse, and you have some refactoring tools and stuff like that. So that's basically what Spring tool suite is. Now we actually won't be demonstrating all of this stuff today. This is all the old stuff, right? What we're going to show you today is more of the new stuff. So it's more focused on other things, Spring Boot more specifically. So next slide, space?
Yeah, use space or whatever.
Okay. So before we jump into STS, I do want to show you a little bit of information about Eclipse, just because people seem to think that Eclipse is dying or something. Maybe it's good to show that there is actually something happening in Eclipse still. Some of the new things in Eclipse 4.5. Finally, we have nested project views. Yes, high five. Okay, so we've wanted it for years and years and years, and now finally we have that.
Even for decades, right?
Yeah, that's that was absolutely not something people would do, right? Nesting projects, right? Okay, so but finally, yeah, we do have that. Some people really care about the second one, dark theme. I don't know why, but there are people who really care about this. If they don't have a dark theme, they don't want to use it. That's improved. There is some speed up in the text search, and I'm going to skip over the Java 8 bits because I've actually got a little demo for that. And they're starting to work on Java 9 support. There is a beta available. It's still very limited. Maybe for this crowd, interesting to know, there are Docker tools in Eclipse, which is probably something that this kind of crowd would be interested in. And in terms of trying to make the Eclipse installation experience smoother, there is also some new developments. There is a new kind of installer, which is supposed to make things a lot easier to install.
Which of course you don't need if you're using SDS, right? Because it comes with everything you need out of the box.
That's right.
If not, by the way, let us know, right? If there's something you're really missing in the SDS distribution, some third-party plugins, whatever, you really would like to see in there, and maybe not only you, but many of you, let us know. We're happy to provide some extra feedback. Should we switch over?
Yeah, I think now is the time for showing the Java 8 bits, right?
Showing the demo.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, the text search in Eclipse and the workspace search, that's thanks to the guys at Google. They help the Eclipse platform to do all the work, to parallelize the threading and jobs API more. And it's now, I don't know, 5 or 10 times faster than before. That's really awesome.
Okay, so the first I'm actually going to show you a few things that have nothing to do with SDS, but just the fact that we have Eclipse means that we have that too, of course, because we're just using Eclipse and extending it. So there's just
a question. Who's already using Java 8?
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. Perfect. Cool. So stuff for you.
So just a few examples of the kind of things you have. I mean, it's not a complete demonstration of everything, but just a few examples just to show that it actually does work now. For example, here is an example on this editor. I prepared an example with default methods, and you can see that the compiler handles that. You see an error message here, which is telling me basically that I'm inheriting the same thing from 2 places, because you can sort of create multiple inheritance situations with Java 8. And there is even a quick fix to address this problem. So you can choose, well, which one do you want? Do you want the method bar or the method from foo? So let's say we want the bar method, and it'll insert this little override method there to solve that. A few more examples. Let's go here. So another thing in Java 8 is this notion of effectively final. So you guys may know, if you're writing these inner classes, these nested things, then you always have to declare a bunch of stuff final or you get these errors. Now in Java 8, the concept of effectively final means that you don't actually have to do this. So for example, here are some lambdas, and one of my lambdas is using this pivot variable, which comes from the closure, basically, from the closure of this lambda expression. And normally, if this was a Java 7 nested class kind of thing, or an inner class, you would have to make that variable final, or it wouldn't be allowed. Now, it still has to be final to be able to use it like this, but you don't have to declare it anymore. That's basically what effectively final means. The compiler still does check that. So if I'm going to try and do something like this and change it to 8, now you see there's an error here, right? Must be effectively final or final. So that's another example. There's a few other things, like a bunch of refactorings. I'm going to show you a couple of them. So let's say you're moving over from Java 7, and you're becoming very enthusiastic about the lambda expressions, but you've written all this code to be Java 7 compliant. Now, one thing you really might want to do is converting these inner class ugly looking things into nice lambda expressions. So therefore, we have this thing called convert to lambda expression quick fix in Eclipse. You just click that, select that, and there you go. Now it's a nice short lambda expression instead of an ugly override garbage thing, right? So, and if you change your mind, you can always go back. There's another refactoring for that too. So you can change it back as well, which I'm not going to do because that would be silly, right? Another thing is there's actually 2 ways to write this code. So you could write this as a lambda expression, which is what this is, or you could write this as a method reference. This is not always possible, but in this case it is. So I could convert this to a method reference as well, which does this. And in this case, too, you can go back if you want. So you can go back, convert to Lambda expression. Some other things that you might want to do, a few more, just 2 more examples. Here is an example of a Lambda expression. And as you see, that's actually a nice thing about it is that I don't have to say that A and B are strings. So maybe you like that, but maybe you don't. And there is type inference going on. So the compiler actually does know that these are strings. It has to know that. Otherwise, it can't compile. But it figures it out somehow. This is called type inference. And if we select this thing here, there is a quick fix where is my quick fix? It's gone. Or did I put my cursor in the wrong place? Oh, here, yeah. I put my cursor in the wrong place. So add inferred Lambda parameter types. We'll add the types for you if you want them. And then, yeah, this one is a little bit silly, but I'm going to show you anyway. This one is a new one, actually. So you can add parentheses around this, because it's really hard to type parentheses, right? So
That's innovation, right? That's innovation.
This is the most important refactoring, of course. OK, so that was a good bit of fun. So now I'm going to actually switch to doing some things with Spring Tool Suite. So now we're going to switch to our stuff. What I'm going to do today is I'm not going to build a big fancy Spring application. You've seen that in other places. I just want to show off some of the feature of the IDE. So I'm going to build a very basic Hello World application and do a few things with it.
Want to quickly walk through the news first?
Sure. STS news, yeah. Yeah, most of this I'm going to show you, so let's see. So the new thing, our new build is based on Eclipse Mars, which is the latest version of Eclipse, which has some of these new things that I showed you. Some of the refactorings are actually new. They didn't exist before. The Java 8 support is also improved. Like I know Gary, for example, had trouble with Java 8 and ran away from Eclipse because of it. So you might try it again and come back.
Come back.
OK, so those things are fixed. The other things, actually, there are some performance improvements. And for people who have a Mac, you might have been bugged by this annoying, this is a very dangerous program, please do not run it kind of messages. Those should be fixed as well. OK. But the other things I'm not going to talk about because they're actually in the demo. So I'm going to show you those.
Another demo time.
OK, so what I'm going to show you is I'm going to create a very simple Hello World application using the tools in STS that are available for that. And then I'm going to show you some of those extra things that we have that are Spring Boot specific. So first of all, I need to create a project. So you could do this in 2 different ways. One way would be to import something existing, which is the import getting started content wizard gives you access to a whole range of examples, basically. Each one of these examples is backed by a small little tutorial on the Spring.io website. Let's just click on a random one here. It doesn't really matter what. See, there's even an IntelliJ tutorial, but I guess that one I won't be able to import, probably.
Don't import that into Eclipse.
That will make Eclipse explode, right? So there's all these things. My screen is very small right now, so I have to scroll, but there is a link. So all of these things are backed by a tutorial. You could read the tutorial. You can import the code through this wizard and use that code as a kind of example starting project to work with. This is not what I'm going to do, though. So I'm just going to close this. And I built a project from scratch using the other wizard, which is the new Spring Starter project wizard. And this wizard you've probably seen in the keynote. So let's quickly go over. I mean, I'm not going to talk too much about it. I leave most of this stuff at the default. You can choose some obvious things like whether you want to have Maven or Gradle, and whether you want to have Java 1.8 or something older. And the good old joke of jar versus war is available here as well, but I'm not going to make it, so we're just going to go over. The next page is the more interesting one. This is where you choose all these things called Spring Boot starters, which is a collection of dependencies that you might want to install into your project and use. And this wizard is actually not new, so what's new about it in the next release, so if you have STS now and you open this wizard, it'll look completely different on this page. But what's new is these dependencies, there used to be like maybe 4, 5, 6 of them. It fit nicely on a page, and then they add more and more and more. And then this wizard was kind of like you couldn't see anything anymore because it was so big, so we had to do something. We'll probably add a search box as well, but that was not done yet. And we split it up into collapsible sections, and we added this frequently used thing at the top. So that frequently used thing is basically, it customizes to what you used it before, basically. If you all the time put web in, then the web will be the first one here. And the next one is the one that you use the second most, basically. So they just stay around more for you to use. I'm going to do something a little bit different than what everybody else did. I'm actually not going to pick any starters. I'm just going to leave it as a plain Spring Boot application, whatever that is. So that's an application that has very good features. It does nothing at all, okay? Except auto-configure many things, but it doesn't use anything. So we're going to, actually it does have something. It has logging. Logging is in there. But let's go ahead. So I finished this. There's a point to this though, because I do want to make a little web application. I forgot to pick the web starter, or I didn't do it on purpose. But so let's create our Hello World web application. I will need to create a class, which is my controller. Yeah, I did the silly mistake again. I have to click here. New class. Okay. And called it my controller. Okay. And I need to make this a REST controller. Well, I don't need to, but I want to. So I want to make this a REST controller. So I start typing REST. Okay, just a second. Now this is the interesting part, because I didn't put the web starter on my class path, but STS has an index basically of all the types that are in the starters, and it knows how to add them to your class path. So that means I can still, the IDE can still suggest these types to you. So the REST controller here is one of those types in the index. And it tells me with a little jar icon means that this type is not yet on your class path, but it is available through a dependency. And you can also see here where it's going to come from. It comes from the starter web starter, and that seems fine to me. I want this one, so I'm going to accept this content assist. You see it's got an error. Oops, the error is gone. So what happened is we just added this dependency to the POM file here, because you selected it through the content assist, okay? This feature is a little bit controversial because some people don't understand what it's doing, and they end up selecting something by accident, and then they have some garbage in their POM. So maybe you don't like it, maybe you do. Let's try it out. If you don't like it, there is a way to turn it off too. So, but this is, some people like it and some people don't. Okay, let's get on with things. I'm just gonna make my request mapping. Yeah, I need to learn to type. It seems when I'm nervous, then my fingers go like a little bit jittery, you know, so let's go. Okay, so this is all. I should be able to run my app now and have it say hello world to me, okay? Let's do that. So how am I going to run this app? Actually, there is a nice feature which is Martin going to do, but I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to use the good old-fashioned just use Eclipse kind of way. So let's go and do, we select our project and do run as Spring Boot application. And it's going to start it. You'll see the, oops, sorry, I can't see much. It starts it here. You see it running in the console. And I should open a web browser. Let's open the web browser. And now I have to put in the URL. This is a little bit clunky, isn't it? Don't worry. Martin's going to show you how this is getting easier with the boot dashboard. But For now, I'm just going to do it this clunky little way here. So I just type localhost 8080. OK, there we go. So that works. That was pretty easy, right? Of course, this isn't a very difficult application, but you get to see. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you another thing that you might want to use. This is not actually a Spring Tool Suite feature. This is a Spring Boot feature, but it's geared towards the IDE user. So it's something you probably want to know about if you're developing. And this thing is called Spring Boot DevTools. And this is just another dependency as far as Spring Boot is concerned. But because it's such a useful thing, we actually added a menu here to add this dependency to your project. So you just say add boot DevTools. It's not doing anything complicated. All it does is add this here. If the only thing it does is make people aware that this thing exists, then I think it's a good feature. So if you add this to your POM and add this dependency, I'm going to have to restart my app just once. But after this, the rest of this demo, I won't have to restart it anymore. Any more changes I make, Spring Boot will notice, the DevTools will notice I made a change to my project, and it will automatically restart the application, sort of, by itself. And does this in a very fast way because it doesn't really restart it, but it does. Like it throws away the class loader and reloads a bunch of things, and it sort of works. So I can't tell you exactly how it works. I just know it works. It's like magic, OK? So just a good kind of magic. I'll start my thing. And let me show you that this works. So if I go now to my app, it still says just hello, right? And I go here, and I'll say, instead of hello, we'll say hello world. A very much improved version of this application. Twice the number of characters for the same price. OK, so I save that. And did you see the console was doing something there? That's Spring Boot DevTools that noticed this. And see how fast it starts. It's only 0.26 seconds to restart this app. And if I go to my page here and reload that, now it has the much enhanced version of my application, right? And this is something that's actually also interesting to show. Is you're not limited to just changing your own request mappings. You can also add new ones, and that works just the same. Yeah.
So if you have JRebel installed, there won't be any conflicts with Volder?
I don't know actually, but it uses a different mechanics. So JRebel is a different thing, like it instruments your classes. This is in a way a much simpler way of doing things. It's not perhaps as fast, but 0.26 seconds is plenty fast in a way, right? So,
but
I don't know. But I think there's no point in trying to use them both. Yeah, you have to choose. You know, they both do the same thing.
Yeah, the question was for the wider audience whether there's a conflict in using JRebel and the boot DevTools at the same time, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to add a request mapping just to show something else still. So just add one more request mapping.
Oh, there's another question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with Spring Boot, but like dependencies, are these going to be deployed to production too? Like DevTools and production?
Oh, the DevTools, well, that's not, the DevTools is probably not something you want to deploy in production. No. So you don't want to deploy that. That's strictly a tool for helping you develop quickly so that you have this reload. So you edit something and it quickly reload it. And Martin is probably going to show you also how to use that in Cloud Foundry, but I mean, there's other uses for it. But any kind of use of these DevTools is really meant for you to use while you're developing your app to have a quick turnaround time.
So I have to go back and change it, my dependency to be higher time?
Yes. Yeah, you can control that somehow through your builds. Like you could use profiles in your Maven build or in your Gradle build or something to make sure that you don't deploy this. Yeah. Okay, let me get back to my little story. Did I save it already? The one thing I have to do is save it, right? If I don't save it, it won't reload it.
The other mapping, the other URL?
Yes.
On the mapping?
Yeah. So I added my extra URL, and it should now be available. I didn't have to restart my app. It should just be there. Oops.
You did not put by in the request mapping annotation.
Did I? Wait a second.
In the controller.
What did I do?
No slash.
Oh,
Just
see.
slash.
Yes, that was the mistake. Yeah, okay. Okay, so the next thing I want to show, as I'm done with the DevTools now, there is a new editor. Well, actually, this editor is somewhat new. It's, compared to last year, it's new. Compared to the previous release of STS, it's just improved. But it's an editor for editing properties files. So a properties file, Spring Boot has all these auto configuration things, and a lot of them are controlled, or you can tweak them by setting certain properties. How would you know what the names of those properties are? Well, you just type here, and it will start telling you what the names of the properties are. So for example, one thing for when you're doing local development and just messing around with your app locally, you might want to change the port it runs on. So I just do server.port and set something here. Okay, so I'm actually not going to use it too heavily, just want to show you what the features are. You can see it does content assist, you've just seen that. It has a bit of checking going on. So for example, we know that server.port is supposed to be an integer. If you type something else, it's going to complain and show you an error message. If you make a typo, you will see a warning, which is telling you that this property does not exist. Or actually, it's not really telling you it not exists, it's only telling you it doesn't know that it exists, which is a little bit different, but we'll come back to that later. So let's fix that. Another thing that you can see here is that if I hover over this, you get some information about your properties. And if you hold the control key, you get a hyperlink. And if you click this hyperlink, then it takes you to the corresponding code element that defines that property. So in this case, you see that property is being defined by a class called server properties, which is somewhere in Spring Boot dependencies. Okay? How does this editor know about these properties? That's something I want to tell you a little bit about just quickly. Is actually the way it knows about these properties is because Spring Boot comes packaged with this thing called metadata. Yes? So I can actually show you an example of that. Just digging through my dependencies here, I happen to know where I find some of them. So if you go look here in the meta-inf directory, you see a file called Spring Configuration Metadata.json. And if you open that, you see all the names of the properties in here. It's some information about where they're defined and some of information about their types and some description. So stuff like that, okay? So this is what basically allows the editor to work. I'll show you a little bit later actually how you can make your own metadata as well. So that's this one. Let me see, what was it supposed to talk? Okay, that's good. So there is another way. Yeah, your question?
Is this already in release? Like, is it already available?
I believe so, yeah. This was already released. There have been a few improvements in the latest release, like some bug fixes and some enhancements, but essentially that editor is available right now in the release.
And it's on by default, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And as an addition to that, the next release of STS is coming out in about 2 weeks from now, right after Eclipse Mars SR1 or Eclipse Mars.1 now. So everything we show you will be available in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And if you're really, really, really eager and would like to use it right away, I can tell you the page where you can download nightly builds. If you really want to use it now, that's available to the public as well. We do not really advertise this nightly builds, but it's not a secret, so you can go there.
This will be a good release for people to download because unlike, I have to say, unlike some of our releases, it's been very well tested because everybody in this conference is using it in their demo, so, okay. So what?
Are you saying we're not testing our releases otherwise?
Yeah, we're testing them, but there's a difference between everybody really using it and we trying to test it a little bit, sort of. But yeah, what was I gonna? Yeah, the next thing I want to show you is actually, I showed you the properties editor, the launch configuration editor. So there is another way to get to this, which Martin's going to show you later on. But if you run as, what that basically does, it creates something that Eclipse calls a launch configuration. You probably know what this is, although it's a little bit, I mean, some people who are not using Eclipse in anger a lot might not even know that it works this way. So there is actually a little hidden thing there that actually says how this thing is supposed to run. And we've created our own version of this, which is Spring Boot specific, okay? So most of this stuff should look familiar. It's just the same as the Java one. You also have to choose a project and a main type. And then there is a bunch of things on here that are Spring Boot specific. So a profile, for example, is something Spring Boot, a Spring Boot profile. You can select for running that configuration. And there is also a way to override properties. So what this does is basically at the highest level of precedence is the command line. You can set properties. That's what you're doing here if you put something in this table. So the same way I can set properties, I can set them here as well. I can just set server.port. And whatever I set here will have higher precedence than anything else. So if I change the port here, 777, that will be the port it's going to use.
So if you want to use separate configurations, right, you can.
So I can put, yeah.
You can create many of them.
Yeah. Yeah, there is many properties you can set. Also, yeah. So actually, I don't need to demonstrate this, but believe me that that property overrides the other one. So what was I going to do next? Let me check my cheat sheet again. Okay. The next thing, which is kind of an interesting to show you, is that these properties with the metadata, you can also define them yourself. So it's not just Spring Boot who can do that. You can write your own configuration properties and use them in your own projects and get the same kind of editor support. So that's what I want to show you next. Is just a little example of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my controller and I'm going to make this an even fancier hello world, because now I'm going to make this message configurable so that I can change what the message, what name it uses here. So to do that, I need some object to tell me, this configuration object to tell me what the name is. So I'm going to ask this configuration object, please tell me the name to put in here. Of course, I need this object somewhere, so let's create a field for this object. Make this an auto-wired field. Like anything in Spring, you really have to kind of inject it from somewhere. So this is auto-wired. And I probably don't want it to be object, but something specific to my case. So let's call it greeting config. I need to create this class. Create the class. And the way you make this configuration properties is very simple, actually. You just add an annotation called add configuration properties. You need to put something here, a greeting. And what this does is basically the prefix for all the properties defined in this class. So all the properties I define in here will be called greeting.something. And I will need a property called name, because that's what I was using in this other class. I could give it a default value if I want to, so I'll just put some value in here so it's not empty. There's always something, even if I didn't configure it myself. You could put some comments here, which is the documentation for the property. The greeting name. And yeah, I guess I need accessors. There you go. So, oh, you know what? One part of my demo is still there from the last time, so it seems to be doing something I wasn't expected. There should be a warning here. It disappeared, so I don't know why. Let me check something quickly, sorry. Just a quick check. No. Or maybe, oh no, sorry. Yeah, it showed up, sorry. It was a little bit late in the coming, but it's there. I probably, because I didn't save it yet. So you do see that there is a warning coming up there. This is actually something you need to know for this to work properly. And the warning is telling you about this. Now actually, properly means, in this case, it's a little bit relative. So these properties can work without doing what it suggests. So what is it telling, what is it asking me here? Let's read the warning. It's saying, when using at configuration properties, it is recommended to add Spring Boot configuration processor to your class path to generate metadata. So if you don't have this metadata, the property still exists, it still works, you can use it in your code, but the editor won't know what it is, it won't know that it exists, and you'll get some warnings in your properties editor. So we do want this, yeah? We want a nice editor experience, so we'll say, okay, let's execute this quick fix. It adds that to my class path, and the warning goes away, okay? So now the warning's gone, I addressed it. There is one more thing I think I need to do for these properties to start working. This is also something you could forget. You have to turn that on somehow. The easiest way would be enable configuration properties, and then add the class here. Okay. And now, and in the meantime, have you seen that there is all this chatter going on in the console? That was Spring Boot, because I was changing my project, right? So I was editing this code, and Spring Boot is seeing that I'm making changes. It's keeping reloading my application. So if all went well, I should go to my web page here and see my customized greeting. Oh no, I changed the port, didn't I? What did I change it to? Yeah, I forgot. See, actually, I need the Spring Boot dashboard because it would tell me what it was, but I wasn't allowed to use it because Martin wants to introduce it, so now I'm stuck here, guessing. I think it was 777. Was it? Was it? No, that's not it? Okay. Oh, wait a second. If it's 888, it means I didn't restart it after I changed my launch config. Okay, let's restart it. I didn't save my controller. I see. When I restart it, it asked me to save something, so that's the problem, actually. So let's try 77. Yeah. Okay. Okay, this messing around was not quite on purpose, but it'll play out nicely later, you'll see. So hello, Anonymous, and now that's the default value, right? So I could change the default value to something different. So let's change it to something else. And I just type greeting. And you see it, the editor now knows this property exists, okay? So I just say greeting.name, and we'll call it SpringOne2GX. Yeah, I made a typo, so I'm not going to bother because I'm already over time probably. So let's just go. And there you go. So now it works. Okay, so that was that. The next. So the last part I want to introduce to you is the YAML editor. So when we built this properties editor, people that we showed it to and who used it, they were quite excited about it. They like it. They think it's a great feature. But a lot of them actually came back and said, yeah, I like that, but I always use YAML format because it's just a nicer format to use. So can't you make it one for YAML? And I was going like, oh my God, this YAML format is so complicated, right? So, but we did manage to implement something. So I will show you, okay? So let's go. For that, I will show you.
Kris, did you have to use
I'm not sure, actually. That's actually more of a question about Spring, which I'm not quite the expert on. But yeah, I think you probably do need the getters and the setters. But that's a question about Spring. So might ask a Spring expert, maybe Gary.
Maybe that's why they are all using Lombok to let them generate. Let Lombok generate all the getters and setters for you, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, so what was I gonna, yeah, the YAML editor. So, okay, let's open this other file here. So I prepared a little project which is kind of the same as the other one, just has a few more interesting things in it, so I have more stuff to demo. So in this one here, I have a class called foo properties, which only purpose is to make complicated properties, basically. It just serves no other purpose. And I will show you the YAML editor interacting with those properties. So to save some time, you can see that it does all the same kind of checking than the other one. It just understands the YAML structure, so it checks this, it gives you the same kind of errors. And this is also something, it understands the structure of the YAML, and it understands the things that it points to as well. So for example, if you have foo.badge here, and I'll show you what this badge is. If I click it, that works too. And you see that this badge is actually an object, and that object has also got some properties as well. So if you go on the, oh, where is my previous editor? It went away. Okay, so here we go. So if I go here, you can see that I have those property names, description, type something, experience. And you see how it cycles through them, because I already used description, so now the next one it suggests is a different one, because it probably figured that you don't want to set the same one twice, right? So, and so forth. Okay, actually this one is a different type, so that works too. There's a few other things it does, like it understands enums and maps and things like that, but I'm not going to show you because I want to move along. There's one more thing that I want to show you, which is interesting, maybe. There is actually another way to define properties, which is the old school kind of way. If I look in my controller here, it works, it has kind of the same thing, except I did it in a different, not nice way, the old way. So in the old way in Spring, you could do something like this. I mean, you can still do this, of course. It still works. This is a spell expression that reads a property and then injects that value into this field. But the thing is, there's no way that we can easily discover these properties if you do them this way. So there will be no information for them. Now, you might have done this because you did this a long time ago and you have hundreds of this, or maybe it's a library you use that has done this. So there are some scenarios where you might run into this, right? So how do we deal with that? Well, let me switch to another YAML file here. So here is my custom greeting name, and I could put something in it like foo or whatever. You can see that it has a warning because we don't know that this exists. It's actually a valid property, right? But the editor doesn't know. Well, we have quick fix for it, and quick fix can do either one of two things right now. Maybe we'll add some more options, but this is the two options you have right now. Either you can say, to hell with this, I have so many of these properties, I just don't want you to bug about it anymore. Just turn off this entire checking part, or that doesn't check off, turn off everything, just that particular type of error will be switched off. So you won't see that anymore, anywhere. Or you can create, this is probably the proper thing to do, you can create some metadata for it, manually create it. And the first time you do this, you have to choose where it goes. So wherever you want to put it, but probably the right place to put it, the proper place is the resources folder, and that's where it's automatically suggested, so you'll say yes. And if you do that, what gets created here is this. Now we realize we probably need a JSON editor, which we don't have yet, but you might install one, but you won't, yeah. There's a lot of work to do here if we want to make this nice, this part still. But If it's just a white list of things you don't want to be bugged about, this already works, right? So just add this thing. You can even change the documentation a little bit or the type if you want to. And from this point on, this is no longer being complained about, and it has a description that you can change. And it will have content assist as well if you start using it elsewhere. That is pretty much what I wanted to show you guys, so I'm going to give things back to Martin.
Great. Thank you, Kris. Yeah, that was a great demo about new features in the Spring Tool Suite. Stuff that we do, and we try to continuously improve stuff for you to work with existing Spring projects, do new Spring stuff, and so on. Another part of the Spring Tool Suite is the Cloud Foundry plugin. So that you can deal and deploy apps to Cloud Foundry. It doesn't really matter if it's a Pivotal Cloud Foundry installation or another Cloud Foundry installation. So this project is implemented with guys from IBM together for the Bluemix stuff. We are improving that as well. So improved performance lately. It's dramatically faster than before. So not improved the performance on the CF side, but for the plugin itself. And for the communication, improve the Spring Boot support, so it's more easy to drag and drop and deploy your boot apps, and additional improvements under the hood. The biggest news for the Cloud Foundry plugin for Eclipse is that it got moved. It's now a project at Eclipse itself. So we moved the project over to Eclipse. We still work on the project. There's still the same guys, but it's now an officially Eclipse project under the Eclipse Cloud Development top-level project. And I think that's great news. Great news for the project, great news for Eclipse, and great news for Eclipse. Good. Let's move on. Let's move on to some more stuff. As you might have seen during the conference, some people are talking about cloud-native applications, and everything is cloud-native, right? You might even call this not the Spring One conference anymore, it's a cloud-native conference now. Everybody's talking about cloud-native applications and this new style of implementing apps, and implementing apps that are ready for the cloud and ready for the next generation of the cloud. And we assume that this cloud-native era changes the way you implement applications dramatically. You structure them differently, you build them differently. A lot of things are changing at the moment. At the heart of this cloud-native revolution are various things, among them continuous delivery, so it's not only a technical, you implement microservices or components, but it's also the culture around that, continuous deployment, build stuff in containers and all that stuff. But I don't want to focus on these more operational aspects on that. But I would like to take a look at what does it mean for these microservices. And people talk about building small, independent, isolated components and decompose your whole system out of these small, totally independent microservices. And what does it mean, actually? So at the moment, we're focusing, at least from my point of view, a lot on Spring Boot for building microservices. And Spring Boot makes it quite easy to build them, these small, tiny little things. And on Spring Cloud for connecting them together, deploying them onto a platform, and making them interoperate in a nice and resilient way. So that's great, right? So you have Spring Boot, you have Spring Cloud for all that. And an additional thing, you need a platform to run and operate all that on, which is, in this case, Cloud Foundry, right? The premier platform for running your Spring Boot apps. So that's great. So you have these components for your development, and you have the runtime. The interesting question for me as a tooling guy, right? So we are in the tooling group, we are tooling guys. For us, everything looks like, oh, there's something we need to build a tool for. What does it mean for the tools? This more or less radical shift towards cloud-native applications. Does it mean anything for us? Can we just continue and go on and use the same IDEs as before? And the interesting observation is that most of the IDEs that we use today and most of the tools were invented at a time when nobody thought about, oh, there's cloud. Cloud was on the Weather Channel on the TV, but that's all, right? Nobody was talking about clouds. And actually, this is a picture of a computer, and this is actually a machine from the time where the IDE, like the Eclipse IDE, was invented and built. The first versions of the Eclipse IDE were built for these kind of machines. That changed radically since then, but the IDE didn't really change radically, right? New features, additional features, nice new plugins, and so on. New versions coming out. That's great. Maybe it got slower over time. So maybe new features, but on the same speed as that. I don't know. Maybe it's a 200 megahertz machine. I don't know. So that's the question that makes us think about what can we maybe change, what can we do differently. And if we think about this cloud-native era and the way we build apps for the cloud-native era, is that you have to deal with potentially with a large number of projects, right? You're not building this one big monolith or maybe 2 or 3 projects in your Eclipse workspace, and then you're done, right? And this project gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and maybe you componentize this a little bit. You potentially deal with many, many, many tiny little projects in your Eclipse workspace. And each of those projects are maybe tiny little components that can run independently, that can interoperate, that can run together. So questions are coming up about how can we keep an overview about those potentially many Spring Boot applications in your workspace or in the world, right, or on your platform. How can we get an overview about that? Where is what running? And what we saw with Kris' example was perfect. And so I usually start a Spring Boot app, and then the next thing, I go to the console, I look through the console, what's the port that I used, and try to find something out there. And maybe I started something else in between, and then I have to go back saying, oh, where's the console for that? Oh, go to some tiny little hidden icon in Eclipse and switch between the consoles and try to find the right one for this process that's running. And the more we do with cloud-native apps, the more problems we get of this sort, right? And that's first an interesting observation. So I think you need something like quick access to console, to log output. You need to keep an overview. And projects are coming and going, right? You're working on more projects. You're creating projects more frequently. So we need to make that easier. And the other thing is that the more you work with cloud-native applications, the more you think about the deployment and operating them on a runtime. And if you're building more and more of them, maybe it's not the best choice to have everything running locally on your tiny little machine all the time and everything that you need. I don't know what you're doing at the moment, but I don't like to install everything on my laptop from the big database to whatever, just to have everything locally and to operate everything locally. All these services from Cloud Foundry and everything what I get from these nice runtimes, I'm basically more or less losing here, right? If I just operate on my local machine. So wouldn't it be nice to keep an overview about what's running locally, but also keep an overview about what's running on, for example, Cloud Foundry, on different Cloud Foundry instances. What services can I use that are already running inside the cloud, but that are maybe useful for me on my local machine as well, without really installing everything? I guess you don't want to install Cloud Foundry on your laptop. At least I don't like that.
In a few years, you will have a 64 gigabyte laptop to do that.
But even in that case, I guess Eclipse will be big enough to consume all that space. But that's a different thing. So those are interesting observations that made us think about this. And this is why we implemented something like what you might have seen in the keynote and in several other talks as some tiny little addition, and here and there it showed up, which was called the boot dashboard. And that's what I would like to show you in action. So I have, of course, I'm using the same cloud-native example application that everybody's using at the conference, the Fortune Teller app. Several projects in here, a config server, Eureka, my service that is producing predictions, a heuristics dashboard, and a UI, a web UI for that is using the service. Okay, I must admit, maybe you can hardly keep an overview with these 5 applications. That's okay. But assume that getting more and more. So what you can do now in SGS is you have a little boot dashboard. And the boot dashboard shows up as a view, and it shows all the boot apps that you have in your workspace in a tiny little tree view, helping you getting an overview and keeping an overview about what's going on here. Two of those applications are not really interesting for me at the moment, which is the config server and the Hystrix dashboard. So that's why I went to the apps in the boot dashboard, and I tagged them. And I can just put tags on apps. Say what kind of app is this, what's important, what's not important, and so on. So I can just put tags on those Spring Boot applications. And the interesting thing is I cannot just put tags on them. I can also filter here, putting in Fortune, so I just see those 3 apps that are interesting to me. I can put on multiple tags, and the usual thing that you are maybe familiar with tagging outside of the IDE, you can now here do for Spring Boot applications to keep an overview. So that's great. The good thing is they work together. So I usually have to start all 3. So I can easily do that. I select them, I press start, and all 3 are starting up, all 3 applications. And they with these, as you know, it doesn't really matter in which sequence they are being started up in this cloud era, because they kind of connect to each other when they are ready and they are up. So that's good. And I see the status. So one is still starting up. Now all of them are starting up and are started. Let me take a look. I see the port, actually, the port information. So I can quickly see where is this application running. So the Eureka application is running on this port, the service is on 8080, and the other one is on 8081. So that's great. Easily see, OK, this is the port for my application. Quickly can open up a browser and take a look at that. I cannot just do that manually myself. So I could open up a browser now, but I can also just do a double click, and then the browser opens up for me at exactly that location. So that's great. It makes it easy to quickly jump to that. So if I go back to the UI, open the UI, here's the UI. That's the application telling me what the future might look like. So that's great. For the service, it is actually is actually a bit harder, because the service doesn't serve anything at the default URL. So I can double click on that, but it doesn't really help me. But I can take a look what the service is actually doing, because the IDE tells me a little bit about this running application. If I go to the request mappings section in the properties, I can see everything that's being exposed by this service, by this app. So I see all the different URL extensions, some of them from my application, those are with the black font, and some of them being produced by Spring Boot under the hood, because I put some stuff on the class path, like the actuator, for example. There's a question. Yes, the boot dashboard is also part of the nightly build. If you go to the nightly builds, the secret place with the nightly builds, you get that. It's in there. So to make it easy, you can just click on the request mappings here to jump to these. So fortunes or random. Random produces a random one out of the collection. So that's nice. But I usually like to use the random one. That's my favorite. So I can go back to the general overview for the properties and put in a default one using, and I even get content assist, right? So that's great. So that's my default path. So whenever I go to the boot dashboard and double click, it jumps exactly to that URL. That makes it really, really easy to deal with many boot applications that are already running on your machine and switching between them. You do not have to take care about using the right port, the right URL, the right URL extension, whatever. You can just put the default one in here, and it's just one click away. Makes it really easy. The good thing is, in this extension, in this default path, you can put in random stuff. So you do not have to choose one of the extensions that are being exposed by the application as default, because some might include some parameters in the path. Right? And if I would like to jump to this as default, username is always Josh Long, so /Josh Long /fortunes, I can just put that in here, and it will jump directly to that. That's great. Another question?
There's no context name here, application context name. For the Spring Boot by default, there is no context name.
A context name, you mean in the UL extension? So the question is there no context name? In my example, not. But I'm not sure I'm sure you can do that with Spring Boot. But I'm not a Spring Boot expert, so I'm the tooling guy, right? Just the tooling. There's another question.
Sorry, the tags in the plot. You have to leave your project and re-import it. Will you get all the tags in this setup?
The tags, you mean, because the question is where are they coming from, basically. They are stored inside of the project. So when I re-import the project, the tags are there. And I put the tags before this presentation of the project, so that's why they are showing up magically for this presentation. But they are stored inside of, as far as I know, they are stored inside of the project. It's not in the workspace because I tried that.
So other colleagues will have the same setup?
I think they could, yeah. If you are committing the information to the repository, if you want. It's not stored in the source code or somewhere in the project. I think it's in metadata somewhere.
It's in some Eclipse metadata. I'm not sure if it's stored in the project or not, but it probably is. And we probably want it that way. So if it isn't, we're going to change that. But that doesn't mean if you care about this, you probably have to. Oh. Yeah.
Thanks for the advice.
Yeah, sorry.
Good point.
So what was I saying? This metadata may not be stored in the project now, but it will be by the time we release. But it does mean that if you want to kind of persist this and share it amongst your developers, that means you have to commit the metadata, which I know some people don't like to do, right? The Eclipse metadata.
And in addition to that, right, this is the very first version of this boot dashboard that we have built. If you have any ideas, any requests, any specific things you would like to see working differently, let us know. We are very open to feedback, right? So if you have anything that's kind of strange, like, oh, you're storing that there, and that's annoying because, and everybody's saying, oh, that's annoying, guys, we change it, of course, right? Okay, so that's the request mapping thing. So that makes it really easy. That's cool. Another good thing about the request mappings is you can open up a browser with the default URL, but you can also jump to the code because we know where the request mapping is coming from. So I can just double click here and it jumps to the code of your project where this request mapping is being defined, which could also be easy to just quickly jump to, where's this random thing coming from? Oh, it's coming from the Fortune controller, of course, in this line. You can quickly navigate and jump. So we try to make it easy for you to navigate, find the right place, keep an overview of your applications. Okay. Of course, you can still use all the stuff that Kris showed you, like the dev tools, right? If you have dev tools on your project, like on this one, I could now go ahead and change my class and do all the stuff. That's of course working as well. A good thing is I said that I don't need the console anymore to look up the port because it's showing up here. That's of course not the only information in the console output of your application, I hope. So it might be good to take a look at the console from time to time. So you can just switch to that. You can just open it here directly. So you see the console output from that application, from that application, from that application. Not a lot of stuff showing up here. Don't know why. At least the UI is showing up some stuff. So you can take a look what's going on and can quickly switch to, okay, show me the log output from this application. You can directly jump over there, which I think is great. Same applies for restarting the app. Just click, it restarts, and restarting the app in debug mode. So if you change something, you do not have DevTools on there, you just want to quickly restart it, press a button, that's it. Right? No need to look into the, oh, where's the console for this application? Oh, press the right button there and then go to the other side and try to restart it again. It's kind of a bit crazy in Eclipse, right? Start is over here and stop is over there. That's why we put in these awesome stop buttons right aside of the start buttons. But you can also operate that very easily from the boot dashboard. So that makes it Just a second. That, I think, makes it really easy and a lot easier for you to deal with potentially large number of Spring Boot apps inside of your IDE. That was a question.
Does the console lock? So if you're looking at the errors for the fortune teller and you get an update on the service, does it switch the views or does it stay on the current one?
Oh, that depends that depends a little bit on what you configure inside of Eclipse. You can configure that the lock, that the console is showing up whenever it changes. So you can enable that. I disable that because if I have many applications, then they're all starting up, they're all doing what? It's kind of flickering around all the time, which I think is annoying. But that it's up to you, right? You can just go to the preferences and say, hey, please show the console whenever something is updated or when there is error coming up. So if something is printed out to the error stream, only in that case the console should show up. That's a standard Eclipse feature that still applies to this feature. You can do that. Yeah. Sorry? Oh yeah, and you can pin that. Yeah. That still applies to all these consoles. Yep.
That console UI is all the same. That's just Eclipse console UI. So, but we just have an easy way for you to switch to the right one. We might think about having a dedicated console, but we don't know yet what it would look like. So, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. Last one for this section.
The heap size work, because when I ran without Spring Boot, if I try to start to web app, I get out of my in a regular web app running STS, Tomcat, external Tomcat, I would say. So here, when you're moving to microservices, I'm running plenty of services in STS. So how does it handle the heap size?
You can configure all that in the launch config. So for each application, there's a launch configuration being created, and you can configure the launch configuration. For example, for the Eureka here, you can jump to that. It selects the launch configuration, and you can put in whatever heap size you want for this JVM. Yeah. So that's kind of under the hood. It creates launch configs, uses those launch configs. If you want to customize them, you can just go to the launch config and put whatever you want in there.
Yeah. So this is not a cloud runtime, right? This is just your local machine.
Yeah. And you can configure whatever you want.
It's kind of tempting to think that we have to provide all the features that the cloud runtime should, but I don't think we should do that. So.
I said that running everything locally is maybe not the best choice when you're doing cloud native applications. So what we did is we implemented Cloud Foundry or a Cloud Foundry section for this as well. So you can just add a Cloud Foundry part to this boot dashboard. In this case, I put in my credentials. That's a PW, so that's the public hosted PWS version of Cloud Foundry. I selected my space and I press finish. So another section is showing up in the boot dashboard in exactly the same way as for my local apps. But now I can see the apps that are running on Cloud Foundry. In this case, nothing. Nothing is running in my space at the moment on Cloud Foundry.
2 elements hidden by filter, it says.
Yeah, but those elements are actually for the local apps,
okay.
Right? But you can at least see that there are elements hidden. So let's change that. We want to deploy all 3 things to Cloud Foundry, so let's do that. I quickly just dragged and dropped them over in this tree, and I see all 3 apps are now being deployed to Cloud Foundry. So that's just a deployment step. That makes it easy to deploy an app quickly to Cloud Foundry or to maybe update them on Cloud Foundry, maybe on your test space, on your integration space, something you share with colleagues or not. But it integrates them directly into the same view, which I think is very interesting because it tries to blur the line a little bit between Cloud Foundry is not anymore just a deployment target somewhere outside in the world, and it's going through the DevOps pipeline, and sometimes it ends up being on Cloud Foundry somewhere. It moves things closer into your IDE and helps you to deal with both sides, right? Local apps and apps on Cloud Foundry. And to blur this line even further, we tried to implement exactly the same that we did for the local apps, but for the Cloud Foundry apps. That's why you can see the console output right in the console. And that output is coming from Cloud Foundry now. And you can switch. So I can jump. It's the same, right? Let's take a look what's going on here. Oh, it's still starting up. That one is already done. That's great. That looks good. So I can do basically the same. The tags are copied when I drag and drop them over, so I can still use the tags. That's great. And I can even use the URL extensions. So when I double click on the Eureka one on Cloud Foundry, the browser opens for the stuff on Cloud Foundry, right? If I double click on this one for the random extension, it shows up the same on Cloud Foundry. So it behaves the same. It feels the same. It's not so far away anymore. Moves things a lot closer, which I think is great. Sorry?
Where does the app name come from with your initials on it?
Oh, the app name on Cloud Foundry. The question is, where does the app name come from? I have a manifest in those applications for deploying things to Cloud Foundry, right? This is the place where the tooling takes the information. What's the name on Cloud Foundry? What are the number of instances, for example, the space on Cloud Foundry? Things that you usually put into either a manifest file or you type into the console if you push things through the CLI to Cloud Foundry. You define that manually yourself. I just put that for convenience reasons.
The manifest is mandatory for that drag and
No, it's not.
It's not mandatory, but it's for ease of use. If you just drag and drop that, it will pop up a dialog and ask you for, oh, what's the name and what's the domain, things like that. There's another question.
Sorry, so if you remove some of the dependent microservices from your local host, can the one that you've left behind actually communicate with the Cloud Foundry ones?
Oh, that's
coming.
another story.
It's coming.
I will answer that question later. Please wait a second. Another question. I will answer that question in a second as well. Well, yeah, you're asking for all the features I'm going to show. Perfect. Thank you. That's great. So the cool stuff here, we're trying to do exactly the same for local apps. So you can do basically the same. This project has DevTools on the class path. So DevTools are being deployed to Cloud Foundry. What DevTools can do for you is what we have seen for Kris is if the app is running locally, DevTools are looking at the class path and seeing what's being changed, and whenever something changes, it starts up the app, right? Of course, if you deploy the app to a remote space like Cloud Foundry, you cannot do that anymore, right? It can look at Cloud Foundry, but nothing is being changed on Cloud Foundry for this. But DevTools has a remote mode, so you can switch on something like a magic switch saying, okay, enable this app for the remote access. And then you can start up a tiny little client on your machine doing exactly the same, communicating with a remote instance. And that's what we implemented for the IDE as well. So what you can do now is here, you can, no. Thank you, Meg. You can connect to this DevTools enabled app on Cloud Foundry a local remote client, the DevTools remote client. And this DevTools remote client allows you now to do exactly the same. So I can go to the service and I can change it. Where is my fortune teller controller? Here we are. So let's do something. Let's say fset text. The future looks great at SpringOne2GX. Yeah. Let's save it. And something is going on the remote side. So if I go to the random one, it's not so random anymore because it tells me all the time, oh, the future looks great. And that's the instance on Cloud Foundry. So it helps you to quickly change your app on Cloud Foundry as well. Not only locally, but get a quick turnaround cycle on Cloud Foundry as well, which I think is great. It really helps you a lot. In the same sense, there is a feature that I wanted to show, but I don't have enough time for that anymore. DevTools also has support for remote debugging. So what I could do is I could restart this app in debug mode on Cloud Foundry, which means that the DevTools on Cloud Foundry for this app would open up a remote debug channel, and I could connect my Eclipse debugger to that. In that case, I can directly debug the app that is running on Cloud Foundry, debugging into the cloud somewhere, which sounds a bit strange, and it's not really useful for all situations. You can imagine, right? If you're testing that with 10 people from your team and everybody's hitting the breakpoint, that could get quite annoying, and quite annoying for the other guys. But you could do that. And of course, debugging this remotely is not as fast as you maybe would like it to be, since the debugging protocol is not really implemented for tunneling it through HTTP things, which you have to do to get access to the Cloud Foundry thing. That might change in the future, but.
Yeah, that's why we ran out of time, because we just don't have time for the debugger to show the view. It's just so slow.
It takes so long, right?
But if you really
but there's
want
no
to,
session after this, right?
work,
There's
so.
dinner. Oh, forget about dinner. We show debugging. No. Don't be afraid. We will get to dinner. So wouldn't it be cool if I could use my local service to do the debugging locally, to run my local service on my local machine, do the debugging, all the development locally on my machine, and that's the answer to the other question, and have the Cloud Foundry stuff using the service that's running on my machine. So I'm not using something that's on Cloud Foundry. The Cloud Foundry microservices are using something that's on my machine, and that's what we implemented for the IDE as well. So what I can do now, let me quickly just stop all my apps here. I can start my local service in debug mode and expose it to the outside world. It tells me, oh, this is really insecure, right? So it's using HTTP and it's routing all your traffic through the internet. So maybe don't do that with your banking services. You can try it if you want, but I would not do it. That's okay. And then you can select from your boot dashboard what the service registry is that is being used on Cloud Foundry. So this local service should register itself with some remote service registry. In this case, with the service registry that I'm using with the Eureka service on CF. So I just select that. And it encounters a problem. What?
Uh-oh.
Ooh, no such. Well, let's try to fix that. That's the one feature that always worked. Yeah, the only one that only works.
The most reliable one.
The most reliable one.
And
but
the other ones were the ones that were broken.
But I accidentally changed the location of this one. So, okay. Boop. Let's try again. Oh, the warning, yeah. The warning is important, but you can remember the decision. To say, yeah, you can run everything. And now start everything up. So it's using ngrok. I don't know if you're aware of this service. ngrok is a public service that allows you to tunnel things to the outside world from your local machine. And it's doing that. Now it's hitting an exception breakpoint. That's OK. Ignore exceptions, right? And it shows up in the properties of this application that's being exposed now through ngrok. So that's one thing. So it starts up locally in debug mode, exposes itself via ngrok to the outside world, and as a next step, registers itself with the remote Eureka so that the remote Eureka can call this local service. And if I go to the remote Eureka, I see two instances, right? Two instances of the service are now being registered. So let me quickly shut down the remote one because I don't want to use that one anymore. I would like to get all the traffic being routed to my machine and maybe put a breakpoint in here. somewhere. And call the UI on Cloud Foundry. Wow, that's hitting my breakpoint locally. So it's calling this service on my machine, and I could do whatever I want with the debugger now on my local machine. So that allows you to have these kind of mixed deployment situations. You're using stuff on Cloud Foundry, but you're not just calling them. You also say, OK, I have these 10 or 20 or 100 services running on Cloud Foundry, but those are the 3 that I would like to work on. So I have them locally running. I change them, I implement them, I do whatever I want, but the rest is still running on Cloud Foundry and is calling your local running service, which I think is really great, is awesome. OK. Enough demos for the moment. One more question, but then we really have to move on.
By doing this, all the requests will come to the local, right? Who is accessing the...
No, it's actually, it's not, right now it's all the requests because Martin's shut down the other service, right?
Yes.
It's just like anything in Cloud Foundry, if you use the Eureka service, there's load balancing going on. So I could have 10 instances running in Cloud Foundry and debug one locally. But then you'd be kind of subject to when the requests get routed to you.
But if you went to the developer experience with Cloud Foundry session, you might have seen that there are options in Ribbon for the client-side load balancing where you can configure that. So the next step for this use case would be to say we automatically configure Ribbon so that my requests to the UI are being routed to my local service, and everybody else will use the existing service on Cloud Foundry. I'll take another question, but don't be angry at me if you don't have time for the Q&A section at the end, because we spread out the Q&A section over the talk, which is OK. Sure, go. I will answer the question in half a minute. But I answered both of the other questions, right? Yeah, part of the demo. That's great. Future directions, lattice support. Oh, that was less than 30 seconds. Of course, the idea is to integrate lattice in this as well. So we implemented also a prototype for this, but it's not feature complete, not at the same level. So we need to work on that, but that's one of the next steps, so that you can have a lattice in the boot dash as well and do exactly the same with lattice on your local machine or a remote lattice installation as for Cloud Foundry. Exactly the same. That's the idea. Yeah, definitely. Something we're going to work on with support for debugging and all the other stuff, and things might be a lot faster. Improving these mixed local and remote deployment settings, something we have to take a look at. Maybe make it a little bit more secure. You might be able to use your banking service in this situation as well. So using at least HTTPS, maybe using some local tunneling service that is not going to the outside world somewhere on the internet. And maybe also improving the debugging, make it faster. The remote debugging on CF itself. Which the new Diego runtime might allow us because we can directly tunnel into that using SSH or something like that. Just ideas. And again, with first version, first ideas, now it's time to get the experience with that and ask people. And when we put that out for all the other guys using that at the conference, for the keynote guys and so on, we already got a lot of ideas back. So if you have any ideas, if you observe something that's not working, that could be better, let us know. That would be great. OK? Next releases, the first one in 2 weeks, including the boot dashboard, at least the version that I showed you. The other one probably in early March next year after the Eclipse release, and the next bigger release after Eclipse releases next year, mid of next year. The usual release cycle that we have in STS. And then we have time for more questions. But it was great that you asked all the questions in between. That was fun. It was good. Cool. More questions. Another I don't know who was. Let's start here. Yeah, go. For Eclipse plugin for Spring Boot. Oh, in the marketplace. The Eclipse marketplace has an entry that's called Spring Tool Suite. There should be no multiple plugins anymore. There should be just one entry called Spring Tool Suite. There might be an old one called Spring IDE. You can ignore that. That's going away. There's one Spring Tool Suite. And depending on the Eclipse version that you have, if you're using the new Eclipse version, there's only one showing up. If you're using old Eclipse versions, there might be others showing up. I don't know. There is one for Eclipse 4.5 in the marketplace. It doesn't show up as STS for Eclipse Mars because the marketplace changed, and it's now doesn't need multiple entries in the marketplace for multiple Eclipse versions anymore. You can configure one entry for multiple versions. So there's just one entry saying Spring Tool Suite for Eclipse or so, and that's the one you can use for Mars. Otherwise, we are here all week. Join us at the lounge, and we can figure that out. We get that installed for you, definitely. One final question.
You may have mentioned this at the beginning. I came in a little late, but are you guys also supporting an IntelliJ plugin for similar functionality?
The question is whether we are going to support the same stuff for IntelliJ. Usually, we are working together with the JetBrains guys who are sitting in this talk as well. It might be interested in the boot dashboard. Who knows? I guess so. I hope so. And we usually hope and work together with the JetBrains guys to build the same stuff into JetBrains as well, but not we are doing the work, they are doing the work. Thanks for that. They're building awesome Spring support into IntelliJ. And maybe the boot dashboard will be part of that in the future, but I don't have product roadmaps for IntelliJ. At least I'm not aware. But you guys are here at a booth, right? So here's a booth. Go to them directly, ask them. They do awesome Spring support for IntelliJ. Yeah, should ask them directly. It's not
They're
part of
actually
our
sitting
work.
here if you want to grab them when they get out the room.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
that's
Catch
them,
him. Stand up, please. No. Okay. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for coming.